Good morning, dear student. Today I am going to discuss last component of Unit 3 of our syllabus, that is the law of the sea. The law of the sea is one of the important area of public international law that deals with the 70% area of the earth that is surrounded by water. So it is very important component of our syllabus, and its knowledge not only important for academic knowledge but also it has a practical importance and need. So let us see about this. Law of the sea regulates the relations of states, coastal and landlocked, and or international organizations in respect of areas that are subject to the jurisdiction of the coastal state and those areas of the sea and the seabed beyond a national jurisdiction. The law governing the sea exists in the codified form at present, which is the outcome of a historical process started with Grotius in the 17th century. Before Grotius, powerful states laid extensive claims of sovereignty over specific portions of the open sea. Grotius championed the doctrine of the freedom of the seas because it is impossible for any nation to effectively possess them. They are res gentium or res extra commercium, that is, they belong to all nations. During this period, the law developed out of well-settled usages culminated into customary international law. The hallmark of this law, which was followed up the middle of the 20th century, was essentially that of non-regulation and laissez-faire, and except for territorial waters, the law essentially endorsed the doctrine of open sea. However, the declaration by the United States President Truman proclaiming jurisdiction over the continental shelf in the 1945 gave a new direction of the law of the sea. Many nations made sweeping claims, sometimes up to 200 nautical miles as their territorial sea, to protect their economic and military interests. This development stressed the urgency of codification of the law in order to strive uniformity and resolve maritime conflicts among nations. The matter was put on the agenda of the International Law Commission in 1949. On the basis of the draft prepared by the International Law Commission in 1958, the first United Nations Conference on the Law of Sea took place at Geneva, which adopted 4 conventions. That is, the Geneva Convention on the Territorial Sea and the Contiguous Zone, that is also known as Territorial Sea Convention. On the High Seas, High Sea Convention. On the Continental Shelf, Continental Shelf Convention. And the Fishing and Conservation of the Living Resources of the High Seas, Fisheries Convention. But the important issues related to breadth of the territorial sea and the fishing rights of the coastal states beyond their territorial sea were left undecided. A second conference on the law of the sea was held on March 17 to April 27, 1960 at Geneva, but again no agreement could be found on these issues. Together, both these conferences on the law of the sea left many matters unsettled, particularly the precise breadth of the territorial sea, the question of innocent passage for warships through straits constituting an international maritime highway and consisting wholly of territorial sea waters, the right of passage and overflight in relation to the waters of archipelagos, the problem of protection and conservation of certain species. Further, the interests of the landlocked states were also not adequately protected except the High Seas Convention. which in Article 3 specifically dealt with their problems of access to the sea. It was soon being realized that these conventions were inadequate to meet the new challenges put up by science and technology, which made it possible for states with sufficient resources and know-how to explore and exploit the underwater mineral resources at greater depths of the sea, and the consequential need to prevent the increasing pollution and the conservation of the fishing resources of the seas. An increasing number of states started proclaiming wider area of the sea as their maritime zone, with its attendant problem of innocent passage and overflight. This made it imperative to reformulate the law of the sea in a composite form to make it conclusive to the new interests and demands of all concerned and pave the way to the hold of third law of the sea conference, that is the UNCLOS 3rd. So, Law of Sea Convention was adopted in the year of 1982, though it was agreed in its second session at Caracas, Venezuela, that all the provisions as well as the complete text of the convention would be accepted by consensus with a view to increase their acceptability, and there shall be no voting until all efforts at consensus have been exhausted. The draft text of the convention was adopted through voting in the 11th session of the conference, and the convention was signed at the 12th session held at Montego Bay, Jamaica on December 10, 1982. The convention entered into force on November 16, 1994 in accordance with Article 3081, 12 months after 60 ratifications and accession were apposited. The Law of Sea Convention 1982 consists of 320 articles spread over 17 parts and 9 annexes. Apart from these, there are 4 regulations and the statement of understanding concerning a specific method to be used in establishing the outer edge of the continental margin adopted by the conference and contained in the final act. Together, the convention comprises the ground covered by the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1958 and creates some new regimes. It contains provision on those matters on which first and second law of the sea conferences failed and created new legal regime of exclusive economic zone and the deep seabed. It has laid down a 12 nautical mile limit for the territorial sea. The convention, formally coming into force, was accepted as a part of general international law, barring its disputed provisions relating to deep seabed regime. In the Gulf of Maine case, the Chamber of International Court of Justice noted that though the convention has not yet come into force and may states do not appear inclined to ratify it, but certain provisions of the convention concerning the continental shelf and the exclusive economic zone were adopted without any objections. These provisions, even if in some respects they bear the mark of the compromise surrounding their adoption, may nevertheless be regarded as consonant at present with general international law on the question. The convention laid down machinery for the settlement of disputes, including an international tribunal for the law of the sea, with its seat at Hamburg, Germany. In 1994, the New York Implementing Agreement was adopted, which amended Part 11 of the Convention to meet the objections of developed countries against the Convention regime on the deep seabed. The agreement addresses the concerns of developed countries, particularly of the United States, on mining the deep seabed resources. The convention is a major achievement in the codification of the law of the sea, and its ambit is very wide. The significant aspects of the convention will be dealt with here in a condensed manner along with the 1958 conventions and customary rules will also be referred. So first basic regime is maritime belt or territorial sea, and it is very important legal regime to administer the territorial water. Maritime belt or territorial sea is that part of the sea which is adjacent to the coastal state and which is bounded by the high seas on its outer edge. The coastal state exercises its sovereignty over this area as it exercises over its internal waters. The sovereignty extends to the air space over the territorial sea as well as to its bed and subsoil. This sovereignty accrues to a state under customary international law, which no state can refuse. However, the generally held view, which finds expression in the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention and the 1958 Territorial Sea Convention, is that the sovereignty over this area has to be exercised subject to the provisions of the conventions and to other rules of international law, which provide certain rights to other states, particularly rights of innocent passage in the territorial waters of a state. Nevertheless, though these rights are well established under the customary international law, the delimitation of the territorial sea remained a principal subject of controversy prior to the 1982 Sea Convention. Even though delimitation is necessarily a unilateral act of a coastal state, it has an international aspect and its validity with regard to other states depends upon international law. So what is the breadth of the territorial sea? Under customary international law, the breadth of the territorial sea has remained a thorny issue. It is a generally held view that at the turn of the century, there existed a 3-mile limit as a rule of general application, which is said to be propounded by Dutch jurist Bijnker-Soek. The 3-mile rule, popularly known as Cannon Shot Rule, had a rationale that a state's sovereignty extends to the sea as far as a cannon could reach or fire, and hence protects the state's sovereignty. The 3-mile limit represented roughly the maximum range of a cannon in the 18th century. However, in 1930 at the Hague Codification Conference, the 3-mile rule was clearly rejected, though no agreement could be achieved on any alternative rule. At the 1958 Geneva Conference on the Law of the Sea, divergent positions were taken by the states. Many states wanted to extend it up to 6 nautical miles from the coast, which led to no agreement on this issue. Before the 1982 Sea Convention was concluded, states proclaimed varying breadth of the territorial sea, generally ranging from 3 to 12 nautical miles, though in certain cases they had proclaimed wider areas than that, and in few cases up to 200 nautical miles. But at the UNCLOS 3rd, claims wider than 12 miles didn't find favor, and the 12-mile rule was accepted by the conference, which may be considered the present customary international law. Article 3 of the 1982 Sea Convention limits the breadth of the territorial sea to 12 nautical miles measured from baselines determined in accordance with this convention. Two methods have been laid down for measuring the breadth of the territorial sea: the low water line and straight baseline. The normal method used is the low water line, as marked on large scale charts officially recognized by the coastal state. However, in the case of islands situated on atolls or in islands having fringe reefs, the baseline is the seaward The baseline is the seaward low water mark of the reef as shown by the appropriate symbol on charts officially recognized by the coastal state. But where the coastline is deeply indented and cut into, or if there is a if there is a fringe of islands along the coast in its immediate vicinity, the straight baseline method joining appropriate points may be employed in drawing the baseline from which the breadth of the territorial sea is measured. No objective tests provided of what constitutes a deeply indented and cut into coastline. How is a fringe of islands defined, and at what distance offshore is in such a fringe of islands in the coastline's immediate vicinity? In fact, the imprecise language of Article 7 made it possible and coastal country to draw straight baselines along its coast. The method of straight baseline was enunciated by the Anglo-Norwegian fisheries case, which had a decisive effect on the baseline issue. In this case, Norway, which has a fringe coastline, by its 1935 decree proclaimed an exclusive fishery zone, mean territorial sea, along almost 1,000 miles of its coastline north of certain latitude. The zone, which was 4 miles wide, measured not from the low water mark but from a straight baseline linking some 48 outermost points of islands, and lands are Skagergård or rock ramparts at a considerable distance from the coast. By using the straight baselines, some of which were 30 miles long and the longest was 44 miles, Norway could enclose waters within its territorial sea that would have been the high seas and hence open to foreign fishing. The United Kingdom, whose fishing interests were affected by this decree, challenged the legality of the straight baseline system adopted by Norway and the choice of certain baselines used in applying it. The court upheld the method applied by Norway in drawing the baselines, and it also did not reject the criteria of low water mark. But the application of straight baseline is dictated by geographical realities. It was propounded by the judgment that where a state has a rugged coastline deeply indented, or if there is a fringe of islands in the immediate vicinity, the straight baseline joining the low water at appropriate points is admissible, provided the drawing of baseline must not depart to any appreciate extent from the general direction of the coast. The areas lying within the baselines are sufficiently closely linked to the adjacent land domain, and the economic interests, as evidenced by long established uses peculiar to a particular region concerned, must be taken into account before the straight baseline method is allowed to be followed by a coastal state. The waters on the landward side of the baseline of the territorial sea form part of the internal water of the state, but where the effect of implementing straight baseline has been enclosing internal waters areas which previously had been considered as part of the territorial sea or of the high seas, there shall exist right of innocent passage in such waters. The convention has laid down specific rules for the territorial waters of the bays, archipelagos and islands. As far as bays are concerned, the 1982 Sea Convention and 1958 Territorial Sea Convention have specified provisions on the territorial waters of bays. Article 10 of the 1982 Convention and Article 7 of the 1958 Territorial Sea Convention deal with bays, the coast of which belong to single state. This obviously leaves out the historic bays and those bordered by more than one state. For purposes of the convention, a bay is defined as a well-marked indentation whose penetration is in such proportion to the width of its mouth as to contain landlocked waters and constitute more than a mere curvature of the coast, and the area of the curvature should be as large as or larger than that of the semicircle whose diameter is a line drawn across the mouth of the indentation. Where because of the presence of islands, an indentation has more than one mouth, the semicircle shall be drawn on a line as long as the sum total of the lengths of the lines across the different mouths. Islands within an indentation shall be included as if they were part of the water area of the indentation. If the distance between the low water mark of the natural entrance points of a bay does not exceed 24 miles, a closing line may be drawn between those two low water marks so as to render enclosed water as internal waters, and consequently there is no right of innocent passage through it. But where the distance between the two marks exceed 24 miles, a straight baseline of 24 miles within the bay shall be drawn so as to enclose the maximum area of water that is possible with such a line. Underage island. An island has been defined as a naturally formed area of land surrounded by water which is above water at high tide, and thus excludes artificial island installations and structures. The territorial sea of an island is decided in the same manner as the territorial sea of mainland territories, and the system of straight baseline as envisioned in the fisheries case would be followed, particularly when they have fringed reefs. Now, delimitation of the territorial sea. The delimitation of the territorial sea between two states opposite or adjacent to each other can take place in accordance with an agreement between them, failing which the median line, every point of which is equidistant from the nearest points on the baselines from which the breadth of the territorial seas of each of the two states is measured. This rule is not applicable in the case of historic title or other special circumstances. Rights of other states in the territorial sea. In the territorial sea, the coastal state enjoy all the rights and duties inherent in sovereignty and the right to regulate this regime. Other states also enjoy certain privileges associated with the right of innocent passage. The customary international law recognizes the right of innocent passage for ships of all states through the territorial waters of a state, but no such right exists for aircrafts in the airspace over the territorial waters. Article 17 of the 1982 Sea Convention gives effect to this rule and provides that ships of all states, whether coastal or not, shall enjoy the right of innocent passage through the territorial sea. No right of innocent passage exists through internal waters. Innocent passage. The innocent passage has been defined in Article 18 of the 1982 Sea Convention as follows. Passage means in navigation through the territorial sea for the purpose of traversing that sea without entering internal waters or calling at a roadstead or port facility outside internal waters, or proceedings to or formal or from internal waters, or a call at such roadstead or port facility. Passage shall be continuous and expeditious. However, passage includes stopping and anchoring, but only insofar as the same are incidental to ordinary navigation or rendered necessary by force majeure or distress, or for the purpose of rendering assistance to persons, ships or aircraft in danger or distress. Another point is passage of warship. The right of passage of warship through territorial waters have remained controversial, though majority of states require prior authorization for the warship. 1982 and 1958 Territorial Sea Convention also do not help in solving this problem. Under these conventions, vessels entitled to innocent passage are ships of all states without making a distinction between merchant, public or warship. Consequently, it is doubtful whether this right is available to warship ipso facto or only on prior authorization of or notification to the coastal state. Submarines, however, are required to navigate on the surface. Warships have the right of passage through international states as decided in the Karku Channel case. Passage through straits. Under customary international law, foreign ships have the right of passage through international straits. This right cannot be suspended on grounds of security in a part of territorial sea that is an international strait and used for navigation from one part of the high seas to another. This rule was recognized in the Karku Channel case and Article 16, Clause 4 of the 1958 Territorial Sea Convention. Next is rights and duties of the coastal state in territorial sea. The coastal state has the right to make laws to regulate the territorial waters. It can adopt laws and regulations governing innocent passage and to prevent passage which is not innocent. This may be related to the safety of navigation, protection of navigational aids, cables and pipelines, conservation of living resources of the seas, prevention of illegal fisheries, prevention of customs, fiscal, immigration and health offences, preservation of the coastal state's environment, and marine scientific research. Foreign ships in innocent passage are required to comply with all such laws and regulations framed by the coastal state and other common international regulations by the prevention of collisions at sea. In the interest of navigational safety, a coastal state may designate sea lanes and prescribe traffic separation schemes, particularly for tankers, nuclear-powered vessels, and ships carrying hazardous substances. Criminal and civil jurisdiction on the coastal state of the coastal state. The coastal state's criminal and civil jurisdiction extends to the territorial sea. The extent to which this can be exercised on board a foreign merchant or public government ship operated commercially passing through the territorial sea has been defined in the convention. The coastal state is not empowered to exercise criminal jurisdiction on board a foreign ship passing through the territorial sea to arrest any person or to conduct any investigation in connection with any crime committed on board the ship during its passage, except in the following cases. First, if the consequences of the crime extend to the coastal state, if the crime is of a kind to disturb the peace of the country or the good order of the territorial sea, if the assistance of local authorities has been requested by the ship or by a diplomatic agent or consular officer of the ship's flag state, or if such measures are necessary for the suppression of the illicit traffic in narcotic drugs or psychotropic substances. As far as civil jurisdictions are concerned, in the matter of a civil jurisdiction, the coastal state is not to stop or direct a foreign ship passing through the territorial sea for the purpose of exercising civil jurisdiction in relation to a person on board the ship, nor may it levy execution or arrest the ship for the purpose of any civil proceedings, save only in respect of obligations or liabilities assumed or incurred by the ship itself in the course or for purpose of its voyage through the coastal state's water. The rules relating to civil and criminal jurisdiction over foreign vessels as mentioned above are not applicable to warships. A warship not complying with the coastal state's laws and regulations concerning passage through the territorial sea and disregarding a request for compliance thereto may be required to leave the territorial sea immediately. What is the position of India on territorial waters? India has a 4,000-mile long coastline with over 1,280 islands and isles, including the archipelagos of Andaman, Nicobar and Lakshadweep. India's position in relation to the law of the sea is generally governed by the Article 297 of the Constitution of India and the Territorial Waters, Continental Self-Exclusive Economic Zone and Maritime Zones Act 1976. In 1955, the President of India proclaimed the Continental Shelf of India, and Article 297 was amended in 1963 to this effect, It was further amended by the 40th Amendment in 1976, which provides that all lands, minerals and other things of value underlying the ocean within the territorial waters of the continental shelf or the exclusive economic zone of India shall vest in the Union of India and be held for the purposes of the Union. All other resources of the exclusive economic zone of India shall also vest in the Union and be held for the purposes of the Union. The limits of the territorial waters, continental shelf, exclusive economic zone and other maritime zones of India shall be such as may be specified from time to time by or under any law made by Parliament. This led to the enactment of the Maritime Zones Act 1976. Till 1956, the limit of territorial waters of India was up to 3 nautical miles, and in that year it was extended to 6 miles by a presidential proclamation. It was further extended to 12 miles in 1967 through another proclamation. The Maritime Zones Act proclaims the sovereignty of India over the territorial waters of India and the seabed and subsoil underlying and the air space over such waters. The limit of territorial waters is the line every point of which is at a distance of 12 nautical miles from the nearest point of appropriate baseline. All foreign ships are given the right of innocent passage through territorial waters. Passage is innocent so long as it is not prejudicial to the peace, good order or security of India. Another important component of law of sea is contiguous zone. Contiguous zone is a belt of sea beyond and adjacent to the limits of the contiguous zone is a belt of sea beyond the adjacent to the limits of the territorial sea of the coastal state. It is not subject to the sovereignty of the littoral state, but within which the littoral state could exercise certain rights of jurisdiction and policy. According to Article 33 of the 1982 Sea Convention, a coastal state may exercise control in its contiguous zone necessary to prevent infringement of its custom, fiscal, immigration or sanitary regulations within its territory or territorial sea. Punish infringement of the above regulations committed within the territory or territorial sea. The contiguous zone may not extend beyond 24 miles from the baselines from which the breadth of the territorial sea is measured. However, contiguous zone is not pertinent as in the case of the territorial sea. It must be claimed by the state. There is a little practice relating to such zone and the standard works do not contain any reference to them. The contiguous zone found its mention for the first time in 1933 in 1930 Hague Codification Conference. India's position on contiguous zone is in conformity with the above provisions. Section 5 of the Maritime Zones Act proclaimed 24 miles from the baseline as the extent of contiguous zone, and Government of India is authorized to take such measures in the contiguous zone as it may consider necessary for the security of India and immigration, sanitation, customs and other fiscal matters. Next is exclusive economic zone. The most significant contribution of the UNCLOS 3rd was the creation of the new regime of exclusive economic zone, which is also a piece of progressive development of international law. The zone, in fact, has its roots in the concept of exclusive fishing zone and the doctrine of the continental shelf. It combines and develops the two. It was actuated by the development that had taken place after the Second World War, when many nations, particularly from Latin America, started proclaiming 200 miles as their fishery zone. Such claims were motivated by a concern for the conservation of living sea resources and other considerations. Failure by the 1958 and 1960 conferences on the law of sea to accept the breadth of the territorial sea wider than the traditional 3-mile zone, further motivated the trend of proclaiming wider exclusive fishery zone. 200 miles exclusive economic zone became quite common in the late 1970s, with 23 states claiming 200 EE exclusive fishery zone and 38 claiming exclusive economic zone. The concept was finally incorporated in 1982 as Part 5, and it has since become part of the customary law of the sea. By the end of 1993, there were 91 states that had made claims to 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone in accordance with the convention, and 19 states has claimed 200 nautical miles EFZ. Exclusive economic zone is an area beyond and adjacent to the territorial sea extending up to 200 nautical miles from the baseline from which the breadth of territorial sea is measured. The zone is an intermediate area between the high seas and the territorial sea, with a distinct regime of its own, which a state can specifically claim. The zone comprises the area which was previously part of the high seas and is not under the sovereignty of the coastal state, but has sovereign rights. Though the convention refrains from describing exclusive economic zone as part of the high sea, other states generally continue to exercise the freedom of the high sea in the exclusive economic zone. In particular, freedoms of navigation and overflight, laying of submarine cables and pipelines, and other internationally lawful uses of the sea related to these freedoms, but they do not have the freedom to fish. However, the convention does not specify whether foreign warships which enjoy freedom of navigation through EEZ can conduct naval exercise in EEZ as they can on the high sea. The delimitation of exclusive economic zone between states will opposite or adjacent coasts is to be effected by agreement on the basis of international law in order to achieve an equitable solution. If no agreement can be reached within a reasonable time, the state concerned may resort to the procedures provided in Part 15 of the Convention. Pending the final delimitation, the concerned states may enter into provisional arrangements. As far as Indian position is concerned, Section 7 of the Maritime Zones Act 1976, in compliance with Part 5 of the Convention 1982, which prescribed 200 nautical miles as the limit of exclusive economic zone, measured from the baseline from where the breadth of the territorial waters is measured. This limit may be altered by the central government, giving due regard to international law and state practice through a notification in the official gazette to this effect. The notification should have the approval of the both houses of parliament before issuance. Next point is continental shelf. One of the important development after Second World War in relation to the law of the sea was the evolution and acceptance of the concept of continental shelf. Geomorphologically, the continental shelf may be defined as the zone around the continent extending from the low water line to the depth, at which there is usually a marked increase of declivity to greater depth. What is commonly understood by the continental shelf is a gently sloping platform of submerged land surrounding the continental shelf and island. It is a submerged bed of the sea, contiguous to a continental land and mass, and found in such a manner as to be really an extension of or appurtenant to this land mass. Normally it extends to a depth of approximately 200 meters, at which point the first substantial fall off of the seabed occurs. At certain places, it continues beyond a depth of 200 meters. Beyond that, declivity of the continental shelf There lays the further fall off of the seabed known as continental slope and the continental rise, before sinking into the deep seabed, ocean floor or abyssal plain. The continental shelf alone, the continental shelf, slope and continental rise together comprise the continental margin. The continental slope is the steep slope with which the shelf proper terminates and extends from the shelf edge to the depth of 1200 to 3500 meters. The 1958 Continental Shelf Convention used the term continental shelf as referring to the seabed and subsoil of the submarine area adjacent to the coast but outside the area of the territorial sea to a depth of 200 meters or beyond that limit, or where the depth of that superjacent waters admits of the exploitation of natural resources of the said areas. The 1982 Convention applies the self-resources of states that have made an exclusive economic zone claim and those that have not done so. It also applies resources lying beyond the 200 miles limit in an attempt to have a uniform rule and taking into account the possibility of exploitation of the resources at greater depth. The convention gives a wider definition which deals not only with the continental shelf but with the continental margin also. Para 7 of Article 76 lay down the procedure to delineate the shelf's outer limit by straight lines not exceeding 60 nautical miles in length, connecting fixed points defined by coordinates of latitude and longitude. Where the continental margin extends beyond 200 nautical miles from the territorial sea, a different procedure with reference to the outermost fixed points of the outer edge of the margin will be followed. But if a state's continental shelf is shorter than 200 nautical miles or is the natural prolongation of its territory end before that, the state will have a continental shelf up to 200 nautical miles. It is the duty of the coastal state to establish the limits of the continental shelf beyond 200-mile belt on the basis of the recommendation of the Commission on the limits of the continent shelf. So, another point is the rights of the coastal state in the continental shelf. The coastal state enjoy limited sovereign right over the continental shelf for the purpose of exploring and exploiting its natural resources, and not sovereignty. These rights are exclusive in the sense that no one can undertake these activities without express consent of the coastal state or make a claim to continental shelf. They also do not depend on occupation, effective or notional, or any express proclamation. The natural resources of the continental shelf consist of minerals and other non-living resources of the seabed and subsoil, together with living organisms belonging to sedentary species, organisms which at the harvestable stage either are immobile on or under the seabed or are unable to move except in constant physical contact with the seabed or subsoil. The delimitation of continental shelf between nations has generated a lot of litigation because of its economic importance. Rules relating to delimitation are provided in Article 6 of the 1958 Continental Shelf Convention and Article 83 of the 1982 Convention. So, as far as Indian position on continental shelf is concerned, in August 1955 and by the 15th Constitution Amendment Act 1963, it was inserted in Article 297 of the Constitution. The Maritime Zones Act 1976 states the Indian position in Section 6. India has proclaimed 200 nautical miles from the baselines as its continental shelf on January 15, 1977. In accordance with Section 1, Subsection 2 of the Act, the rights and duties of India in this regime are similar to other states as specified in the international conventions. However, the government can declare any area continental shelf and its superjacent waters as designated area and make provisions to regulate it. Then another point arises, what is distinction between continental shelf and exclusive economic zone? The regime of continental shelf and exclusive economic zone coexist under customary international law and under the 1982 convention. They contain few significant similarities and overlapping also. The coastal state enjoys sovereign rights over the resources of EEZ and the continental shelf. These rights are primarily of economic kind and the area otherwise pertains to the high seas. The traditional freedom of the high seas under the customary international law, that is freedom of navigation, overflight and immersion, are available to other nations in this zone. However, they are different in many ways. Whereas the coastal state gets rights over the continental shelf because of its land territory, that is continental shelf occurs to it under customary international law ipso facto. The economic zone, exclusive economic zone, is optional. It needs to be proclaimed by the coastal state. In other words, exclusive economic zone is a concept of law, whereas continental shelf is a concept of geography. Whereas the rights of continental shelf can exist beyond the limit of 200 nautical miles from the coast, where shelf and margin extend beyond that limit. It is not so with the exclusive economic zone. The resources of EEZ are subject to the rule of sharing the surplus of the living resources of the EEZ with other nations, particularly with landlocked and geographically disadvantaged states. But the resources of the continental shelf are immune from the requirement, and if the coastal state does not exploit them, no other state has a right to do so. The continental regime applies to shelf resources of states that have claimed an exclusive economic zone, as well as the states that have not done so, and applies to the shelf resources beyond the 200-mile limit. Therefore, under the 1982 convention, a continental shelf can exist without EEZ, but there cannot be an EEZ without a corresponding continental shelf. In the case of Libya versus Malta, court was of the view that both the regimes are linked together, since the rights enjoyed by a state over its continental shelf would also be possessed by it over the seabed and subsoil of exclusive economic zone which it might proclaim. So, my dear students, today we have discussed the importance of law of sea and territorial water. What are the rights of other coastal states on territorial waters? What is innocent passage, etc. We have discussed contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, as well as continental shelf. In next lecture, I will discuss high seas. Thank you very much.